turn my microphone here on, and then we can look at Titus chapter 1 again. Titus chapter 1. Today, we're going to look at verses 5 through 9. We're still in the middle of looking at some of these characteristics, qualifications for the pastor in Titus chapter 1. In Titus, there is no list for qualifications of deacons, only that of pastor. We have, of course, in the book of Timothy, we have the qualifications also listed for deacons. And so we know there are those two offices in the Scriptures that are mentioned, but obviously Titus had a much more, shall we say, much more rapid and urgent mission than did Timothy. Timothy was able to stick around a little bit longer, see the next step in some of these things take place, and Titus was there rather briefly. He was to be there until he was relieved, and so his mission was a little bit more urgent. He didn't have time to get the deacons and all that appointed, but his mission was, as verse 5 says, verse 5 tells us what his mission was. For this cause left I thee in Crete, that thou shouldest set in order the things that are wanting, the things that are lacking, the things that need to be yet accomplished, and ordain elders or pastors in every city as I had appointed thee. The Apostle Paul had appointed thee. And so that was his mission. And then he goes on to give the qualifications for the pastor. And verse 6 through 9, we'll read that. If any be blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. For a bishop must be blameless as the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre, but a lover of hospitality, a lover of good men, sober, just, holy, temperate, holding fast the faithful word as he hath been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convince the gainsayers. All right, so as we looked last time at the first few of these, and so we're going to continue on that list. In verse 6, we covered the fact that he is to be blameless. That does not mean, of course, that nobody ever accuses him of anything, but it means that substantively there must be nothing that someone could point a finger to and say, "Now this is sinful. This is wrong. This is not a good testimony." All right. Paul was blameless as a Pharisee. That means he was the model example of a Pharisee. All right. He did not. That didn't even mean he was saved at that time. He was. But as a Pharisee, he was blameless, and nobody could lay a hand on him. He was zealous. He was exactly what the Pharisees looked for in a protege. He was somebody that, boy, they could see as an up-and-comer. Well, the pastor is to be an example of a Christian, right? That's really, when you get down to this list, that's what it is. It's to be an example of a Christian, so that the standards, the qualifications of a pastor are really not different a whole lot. There is one qualification that sets the pastor apart from even the deacons, and that is that he must be apt to teach. That qualification is not listed for a deacon. A deacon is willing to serve, do wherever. He does not have to be comfortable teaching in a formal teaching setting, but a pastor obviously has to have that. All right, but anything other than that, all the qualifications of a pastor are just the way Christians are supposed to be. We understand that it takes time for people when they get saved to grow in Christ and to become what they should be as a Christian. All right. Well, those people, until they get to that point, are not qualified to be pastors or deacons, for that matter, and so they have to grow in the Lord. When they finally get there, if they do, which of course is the goal for everybody, then they would, if the Lord calls them, and they would feel called to be a pastor or a deacon, then the Bible says that's a good calling. That's a good thing to do. Obviously, it's not for everybody, but every Christian ought to strive for these same standards in their life, these qualities that are listed in Titus and also in Timothy. All right, so blamelessness, the husband of one wife, we've already talked about that. Having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly, children who are disciplined and not hooligans, not rebellious and out of control kids. That doesn't mean they're perfect kids. If the standard of children must be perfect, there wouldn't be one pastor left standing in the pulpit. So we have to be careful about that. All right, I know it's easy to point to pastors' kids, and that's a very easy thing to do. We can point to their flaws, can point to my flaws, and all of those things. The standard is not perfection, but obviously the kids can't be hooligans, rebellious, not able to be controlled. They ought to be under control, disciplined children. The standard is not even that the children have to be saved. I mean, we want them to be saved. Every pastor wants his children to be saved, if he knows the Lord, and he wants them to be saved. He prays for them to be saved. He works toward that goal. He leads them, as it were, the proverbial horse to water. He leads them as much as he can to the water of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And most of them will come to Christ. There may be some that won't, and later on in life they will demonstrate that they didn't want the Lord. They rejected Him. They had a full dose of seeing who the Lord is, and they didn't want Him. They rejected Him. You know, there are some who do that. It's sad, but that when a child grows up and chooses to reject the Lord as an adult, well, he's no longer a child, and so obviously this standard is for children who are in the home, and they who are in the home, if they're in the home, then obviously they're to be under control. What they do when they leave the home, obviously the pastor is not accountable for their actions at that point. But our prayer is that they would come to Christ. All right, now verse number 7 here is, I think, where we left off. In verse 7 it says, for a bishop, this is an overseer, a pastor, another name for a pastor, a bishop must be blameless as the steward of God. Right, here's that word blameless again. But this has to do, I think, with his motives. In other words, his motives in being a pastor. Right? They must be blameless. All right, there are all kinds of wrong motivations to be a pastor. The idea that he might want something for himself, whether it be money, power, prestige, all of those kinds of things that people aspire to, that the world aspires to. And people can desire the pastorate for all of those reasons and more. But he's to be blameless as to his motivation. And then and the idea here is as the steward or the caretaker of God. All right? As a caretaker of God, he understands, or he should understand, that none of what he is doing is really his to control. In other words, It's not mine. It's not any single member's. It's the Lord's. We're a caretaker of God. All right? We have to put ourselves in a subservient role and serve the Lord and lift up the Lord and take care of what is His. Right? So everything that we are doing, we are understanding that we are taking care of not what is our own, but really even what is more important than our own, and that is what is God's. All right? And so that is a qualification for being a pastor, that he would be blameless in the sense that he takes care of what is God's. He does not take it for himself. And we have several things that are listed here, starting in verse number 7. First of all, he starts out with a negative description. This is what, if he's blameless as a steward of God, this is what he won't be like. All right? He will not be like these things. So he must not be, number one, self-willed. Okay? He must not be self-willed. It's easy to let pride get in the way and be a self-willed person in the ministry and work and striving to accomplish that which we want to accomplish, rather than striving to accomplish what the Lord is doing and what the Lord wants accomplished. All right? And so we have to be not self-willed, not self-pleasing. If the man is in it for himself, for what he can get out of it, if we can discern that as we're seeking a man to be the pastor, then we obviously would want to shy away from an individual like that. All right, and so it's important as we check people out, and sometimes it's hard to get references and things and people to be honest, but I always hope that people will be honest when it comes to this situation, because it means a great deal. It means a great deal to those people in those churches that need pastors, that they get ones that would really be in it for the right reasons and not self-willed, not wanting what they want when they want it. It says here in the next place here, not soon angry. All right, this means he's not hot-tempered. Doesn't get mad quickly or use anger as an intimidation tactic against people. This can be a real abusive situation when the pastor is soon angry and uses his anger as a club to beat people into line. Self-willed man, these kinds of despotic, fundamental preachers, little popes, if you will. Oh, they would hate the Pope, right? There's some of these guys that just hate the Pope. But the reason they hate the Pope, I think, is because they're not the Pope. I mean, they wish they were, right? They want to be the Pope in their little churches and control everybody, and go to everybody's house and tell them what to wear in their house and everything else. I've seen it all, folks. They knock on the door, and if the lady comes in a attire they don't like, they chew her out and make a big deal out of it. As if there's no scriptural command to that the husband is the head of the home. Those kind of things. This is not the kind of man you want as a pastor. The Bible is making it very clear. A hot-headed person who's not under control, is not a good candidate to be a pastor of a church. And so you have to blow by that kind of person. Some of them are pretty good, I'm sure, at hiding this until they get in the ministry in a particular church. So it's important. A lot of them, though, if they've been around a little bit, they have a history. You can check them out as long as you take the time to do it. And it takes effort, and it's worth the effort. You have to make sure that gets done. before a pastor is selected. All right? Not given to wine. Not given to wine. All right? Given to wine would have the idea of being an excessive drinker. Now, I believe in our day and age that the standard ought to be no alcohol. Simply because we don't need to have it. We don't need to preserve things by using alcohol today. It's not necessary. Now back then, with no refrigeration, living in a hot climate, some people talk about this as grape juice, blah, blah, blah. Well, if it was grape juice, then they only had grape juice about 2 weeks out of the year. That was it. And then the rest of the time they had to live on water, and bad water at that. So the idea that nobody in the New Testament times, or that Jesus didn't make wine and all that kind of thing, when the Bible clearly says he did, is just not right. It's not scriptural. We can try to change the Word of God for our own purposes. I never believe in doing that. Would be convenient, wouldn't it be, if we could make it grape juice? We could say no, and if then the Bible could say, "Thou shalt not at all ever drink alcohol." Paul never said to Timothy, "Take a little wine for thy stomach's sake." I wish that verse wasn't there. Well, it is there. Now, they lived in a different time. They lived in a time when if you wanted a beverage of any kind, you couldn't go to the grocery store, pop into the grocery store and haul out a Faygo root beer. I like that. And open it up. I pour it, Oh, there's nothing better than root beer. I drink root beer everywhere I go because I can't have caffeine. So that's my one thing I can drink that I like. If I'm at a restaurant, I always order root beer because that's all I can drink. Sprite. I'd rather have water than pay for Sprite, honestly. It's just fizzy water. All right, so but root beer I do like. So when I'm out, that's what I usually get. But they couldn't do that back then. They couldn't open up a root beer. They couldn't go and open up a bottle of grape juice. They couldn't do it. All right. Well, how were they going to drink anything other than bad water? Well, and Brother Mike Eccleston's been telling me how the water is in certain other places in the world. We're pretty spoiled here. Well, not until a few years ago, but we when it came down to this well here, that's about the worst thing you're ever going to find right there. I never tried to drink it, by the way. I never even tried it. I think we had a few visitors that we forgot to tell along the way that may have tried it, but I never did. And I don't think they tried it again either. So I'm just thankful that we have great water now. It's city water, and I can turn on. It was just amazing when you could go to the kitchen faucet, just turn on the water and drink it. It's like, wow, that is weird. I mean, that's the way most people live in the United States anyway. But Mike's been telling me, Mike Eccleston, about how horrible the water was in the different parts of the world where he was. You don't dare drink it. So they provide the bottled water everywhere you go, and you have to drink that and all the rest. Well, there wasn't even bottled water back then. They didn't even have bottled water that they could have. All right. So if they wanted to preserve something for a beverage to drink, it had to be wine. They weren't trying to get drunk. The purpose of drinking wine was not for the alcohol. It was a beverage that they drank. And they even understood that you could. There were certain people that kind of like to nip a little more. I'm sure back then there were people as well who made it a little stronger. It wasn't regular wine, it was other stuff. I mean, even today, you have regular wine, and then you have your your shots of whatever else it is, vodka or whatever. Some of that stuff, they drink this much of it and they're soused. Well, you can do all kinds of things, but back in this day, if you wanted to have a beverage, you had to have alcohol to preserve it. All right, and so in our day, you don't have to have that. In our day, if I'm looking for a pastor, I'm looking for a man who doesn't drink alcohol. Testimony's sake. It's not necessary. Why do it? You don't have to do that. We have all kinds of choices today without drinking alcohol. I've had one sip of beer in my whole life. And that was when I was like 3 years old. My dad gave me a little drop of beer in my baby bottle. And I still remember it. Because I thought I was big stuff. When he poured that in my bottle, I strutted around with it. Even at that age, I knew it was different. I knew it was different than apple juice. I mean, if you look at beer and you look at apple juice, it almost looks the same. But I knew it was different. And that's the only drop of alcohol I've ever had other than maybe NyQuil. Right? Now, so I haven't missed anything. I haven't missed a thing. I got all kinds of choices. If it weren't for my caffeine problem, I could have any kind of pop I want. I could have any. I mean, there's all kinds. Go to the store. Look at the different kind of juices they have there. See what kind of beverages you can drink that are non-alcoholic. There's all kinds of them. There's no reason to go and compromise your testimony or to risk becoming an alcoholic yourself. There's no reason to do that. So when it says here that he must not be given, verse 7, not given to wine, well, obviously there were some men who went above and beyond a beverage situation and went to a drunk situation. All right, much like some of the Catholic priests do today. Some of them are the biggest drunkards around. They get themselves hooked on that stuff, and pretty soon they're hooked. Well, we don't want that. All right, so not given to wine is the standard. Our standard, I think, is if I'm looking for a pastor, I'd be looking for one that said, nope, no alcohol. I'm not going to drink it, and I'm not going to encourage anyone else to drink it. We don't need to do that today in order to drink. So that's an important standard. Verse number 7 is as well. No striker. Here's another negative thing that he's not to be. An example of what he's not to be. That's a strike. What's a striker? He's not to go on strike. A brawler, a hitter, somebody who abuses people physically, somebody who pushes people around, like my brother used to when I was growing up. My brother, I was the big mouth and he was the big hammer. And he'd comment. The first thing I'd do is pop my mouth off. First thing he'd do is start shoving me around. And he was way bigger than I was, so a lot of times I reveled in the fact, though, that I was a lot faster than him. So I could say something and then run, and I'd be okay. But nevertheless, no striker, no abusive personality. And I think you can include in that somebody who would abuse. I mean, you can obviously hit with your fist or with your hand, but there are people who abuse with their tongue as well. People who are abusive with their language and what they say and how they demean others and put them down with what they say. That's a person who's not qualified to be a pastor of a church. He's under control. This goes kind of along with soon angry, but he's not to be somebody who takes out on other people and uses physical abuse. Then finally, the last one, the last negative one, is not given to filthy lucre. What is that? Not given to filthy lucre. What's filthy lucre? Bribes, money, right? Not given to taking bribes, not given to... he's not in it for the money. He's not in it for what he can get out of it. All right? He's in it for the money. I don't know why he's in it. But he should. I mean, although I know some churches where they are in it for the money and they do get the money. You look at some of those guys on the 700 Club or whatever, and it's a constant appeal for money, money, money. And all that money goes into their personal lavish lifestyles. They're flying around in a private jet, going all here and there, flitting around, all this kind of stuff. It's just inappropriate. Disqualifier for the ministry, for somebody to be in it for his own financial gain rather than in it for the Lord. None of that, of course, cancels out the necessity to take care of the pastor, to make sure he has what he needs and all that kind of thing. But if he's in it for that, if he's in it for the money, he's in it for the wrong reason. That's inappropriate. He's here because he's called of God, and he's to care for the church. He's a caretaker, a steward of God. So obviously, if he's a steward of God, he can't be any of these things that are negatively listed here. All right? But then there's a list of positives as well that are given. All right? So here's what he's not to be, but here's what he is supposed to be. All right? So a good list here. Verse number 8. He is to be a lover of hospitality, a man of hospitality. All right? The idea here can be, obviously, that he's willing to entertain strangers. I don't think the pastor has a whole lot of business saying it's none of your business. In other words, it is your business. And I think the pastor lives kind of when he gets into the pastorate, he better not be too skittish about the fact that he's living in a fishbowl of his life. That's what he's living in, and he better not balk at that. The idea that he would try to shut people out, not be hospitable in the sense that his home is not opened and all those kinds of things. The idea that there's all kinds of secrets that he has to hide, or anything like that. That's not how a pastor's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a man that's given to hospitality, open, wants people to interact with him and his family, and so on. He's not trying to shut people out. He's trying to reach out to people, strangers, God's people alike, whoever they might be, and so he must be a lover of hospitality, not somebody who wants to avoid it. All right, a lover of good men, somebody who loves men who are, and some as we translate this word, I think good men would be included, but probably the word things would even be a broader interpretation of this. A lover of good things, which would include good men and good things that are just generally good things, that are known to be good. Not somebody who is shying away from that which is good. You can be accused of being a goody two-shoes, and all those kinds of things. I always considered that a compliment. When somebody called me a name like that, a goody two-shoes or something, I always thought, well, isn't that a good thing? Isn't that what I'm supposed to be? And aren't I supposed to love that which is good and shy away from that which is evil? That never bothered me too much when people called me names like that. And so I was happy to take it. I know some people get all concerned. Oh, they see me as a goody two-shoes. So what am I supposed to do? Go out there and do something not good? So somebody will see me as a normal person? Well, I'd rather be a goody two-shoes and just do what I'm supposed to do, and be concerned about doing good. That's the idea here. A lover of good things, which of course would include men and everything else that is around us. Sober is the next one. Of course, that would be as opposed to being drunk. Instead of being drunk, you are sober. All right? And I think it includes also the idea not just that, but also of being of sound mind. Always thinking properly and not being under the influence of other things that would cloud our thinking. And so that would be the next word. Just. I think another word for that would be to do right. A person who does the right thing. All right? He's a man who is just and right. Somebody who cares about doing that which is right instead of that which is not right. All right? Trying to get through this. Holy. Separated. That means. All right? He is devout. We would call it in the old terminology pious. Somebody who is separated. Somebody who is not like the world. Separated from the world. All right? Living out a pious, holy life. Not somebody who is living in sin, very clearly. All right? The next word is temperate. Self-controlled. That's what that word means. Is to be under control, self-controlled, under the control of the Spirit of God. All of those things, which of course leads to being self-controlled. So he is to be all of those things. And finally, he must be a man of the Word of God, holding fast the faithful Word as he hath been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convince the gainsayers. All right, so we got a couple things here. We'll start off with this next time, and then I want to get into the idea here that we have a pattern in the Scriptures, knowing that these two offices have requirements for leadership. The idea is that leadership in the church is different than other areas where people are following. We want, if you're leading, as Paul said, follow me as I also follow Christ. Right? So we don't follow Paul in an area where he's not following Christ, but when he's following Christ, and so we want our leaders to be leaders who will follow Christ and then lead others to follow Christ. And so we're going to look at our leadership standards next time and review those and see why we have them. Obviously, there are two scriptural offices that require these standards: pastor, deacon. All right? But we also understand that anything that the pastor and deacons commission or shall we say give a job to, they are commissioned by the pastor and the deacon, and so they should meet certain standards that like, for instance, Sunday school teachers. We don't want just somebody coming up off the street, getting saved, and still doesn't know the Word of God, doesn't live right for the Lord, still learning some things, and then put them in our Sunday school class. All right, we don't want that. We want to make sure that they are ready to lead before they get in there, and so they have to meet certain qualifications, certain standards, and the Scriptures